This is the video you've all been waiting for. Now listen, I don't know everything there is to know. As a matter of fact, I don't hardly know anything. But I definitely know the concepts of what's going on under the body of this car, and I can lay these out in visuals and kind of give you an idea of what changes are doing. And if you get faster because of it,
feel free to mail me a check for $50,000.
So without further ado, let's get into covering some basic concepts. One of the biggest, most confusing things for people when they're trying to set up a late model is what the heck's going on underneath the rear suspension. It's got a thing called the forelink, and it's doing all kinds of crazy magic that helps you get around a corner. Let's debunk some of that magic and bring it into the real world. The forelink refers to the chassis setup where there are 4 bars that connect to the axle and the chassis. So this is the forelink linkage, and this is the axle, and as the axle moves up and down, there's an arc that forms here that the axle moves in. Statically, when you're at ride height, you can adjust the length of these, and it will adjust what's called axle lead, and that's when one side of the axle is in front of the other side. Now dynamically, when we're going over bumps and stuff, the left side, and since we adjust them asymmetrically, can move up farther than the right side, depending on how we adjust it. This effectively creates what's called rear steer, which means that as you put your foot on the gas, the angle of the rear axle is changing, and it's turning the rear end of the car. It's like you got another steering wheel under your right foot. The forelink bar is actually called the trailing arm in iRacing. If you want to create more rear steer, move the left rear trailing arm up, and if you want less rear steer, move it down. Now when you move this, it's actually going to change the static axle lead. Think about it. With Pythagorean theorem, as you change that angle, the length of the bar not changing, it actually creates a shorter distance between the wheel and the chassis. So you have to adjust this by making the bar on the left side longer, and it re-squares the rear end up. Thankfully, iRacing makes this a breeze to adjust by just changing the axle lead. So the forelink holds the suspension forward and backward. The J-bar is what holds the suspension side to side. So this is the J-bar, and as you adjust the chassis side mount of it, it changes the angle of the J-bar and moves the entire rear axle housing to the left or to the right. Imagine it as if it were another arc, and as you step on the gas and the chassis lifts up, the rear end will move to the left because the J-bar mount is on the left side of the chassis. So in short, if you move the chassis side of the J-bar up, the entire rear end will move to the left a little bit at neutral. If you have a steep angle on your J-bar, it will actually take the rear end, the axle, and move it to the left more when the whole chassis moves up on the throttle. Basically what it does is it helps rotate the car when you step on the gas. If you have less of an angle, the car's not going to rotate as much when you step on the gas, because the rear end's going to be more center. It's not going to have as much action on it. So anywho, now that you know all of these bars, and at least have a little bit of an idea of what they do, you're dangerous in making a setup. So as a driver, when you change these bars, you are definitely going to notice it. Going from the iRacing baseline, you can pretty much just adjust these, and you'll be good to go. The only other change I would recommend making is actually the gear ratio, which is probably something you should change at every track you go to. I'd start about a 4.86 and then move up or down from there depending on where your car tops out at. You'll want to hit the rev limiter at the end of the straightaway and not really have any more. Especially in the Pro late model, I like to have the gear ratio really high up so that it hits the rev limiter as if I was going to lift. And that kind of makes it so that it gets more power out of the corner instead of at the end of the straightaway. So another important change you've got to know is stagger, and that's going to be the right rear diameter compared to the left rear diameter. And as you add stagger, the car is more likely going to turn to the left because the right rear is moving around and traveling more distance than the left rear because it's bigger. So I started us off by talking about these bars for a reason. You got to get the concept of these things down, at least a little bit, so you know what you're doing when you're adjusting them, since they're one of the most noticeable things you can feel as a driver. Earlier tonight, I did a little experiment. I took just the baseline iRacing setup to Williams Grove, adjusted only the bars and the gear ratio, and I got like within 1/1000th of a second of my previous quickest time. So it's pretty critical to know how these things work, because you can take the baseline, which is already good, and just adjust the bars to what track you're going to and be competitive. Yes, there are gains to be made by adjusting things other than the bars, like for example the shocks and the springs. However, the basic stuff that you get with the default setup, the default baseline, are actually pretty valid, and I don't really notice that much of a difference when I make changes there. My last tip on the bars and that whole setup side of things: if you don't remember what something does, just mouse over the control in iRacing and it'll tell you pretty much everything that I've said here. Just think back to the diagrams to make them easier to understand. I know without the visual, I don't really get it as well. So listen, if I'm going to create a setup from scratch, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to load up a testing session at whatever track I'm going to go to, and have it with 50% usage. And this will be a good balance between used and unused, so I know where the dark spots are going to be on the track and where I should aim the car for. Then I'm going to take the baseline setup out for a ride around the track a few times, and just see what the fastest lap I can put down is. I'd probably recommend running about 5 or 6 laps, just so you have an idea and you don't run a dud lap and then think, oh, I need to adjust everything because I can't drive this. Then, from the baseline, I'll go back, watch those laps, see what the car's doing in the corner, and adjust based on what I see. For example, if I hit the gas and I feel like the car isn't rotating towards the inside of the track like I want it to, maybe it's shooting straight for the wall, I'll try adding maybe a little bit more stagger or increasing my bar angle on the left rear. I definitely only try to make one change at a time and then go out and try for 5 laps and then come back in and see how it felt. If I got faster, I'll usually tend to move whatever adjustment I did a little bit more extreme until I can't feel a difference anymore, or the car gets worse. This is kind of a general setup thing, but this is basically my process when I'm creating a setup. Sometimes, however, I like to go a little bit extreme and try to min-max some of the changes I'm doing. Like for example, instead of moving one thing one way, I'll move it all the way. Not to say there's no merit, but it's kind of difficult to fine-tune a setup and get quicker this way. However, there is something to be learned by doing this. You kind of learn what the changes do and what an extreme difference feels like. Also, don't forget, if you want to see how competitive you are, you can just load up a Ghost Racing session and then just check yourself compared to everybody else with your setup. I know in race trim, things get a lot different, especially when you have to maneuver around people, so that can give you an opportunity to evaluate the maneuverability of your setup and make sure that you're not driving a super loose car or super tight car that's fast, but you can't maneuver around traffic. So anywho, try adjusting the upper trailing arms, the J-bar, the stagger, and the gear ratio, and you should be dangerous and in contention to get a top 5 or even win a race.
And don't forget about the $50,000.
Anyway, that's it for this one, and really, this is just, I haven't really given you that much information except for just the visual as to what actually is going on, and kind of direct you as to where to start if you're going to want to build a setup. So, yeah, if you have any questions, hit up in the comments section, or you can join this Discord. This is going to be a new thing that I'm doing. I've got a Discord server. You can join, come hang out, play video games, ask questions, just chat, meet some friends. All that. So yeah, that's a new thing I'm doing, and I'm kind of excited about that. Excited to meet some of you guys and play some games with you. Remember to subscribe to my channel, guys. Trying to get to 1,000. Probably not going to happen before the 20th, so I'm going to lose my partnership, but it doesn't matter because I love making content for you. Thanks for watching. Take care, guys.